Studios halls, tabletop games where nightmares creep, in a realm where sanity is lost and weak. Welcome to the abyss, where dreams shatter. Inside the GM studio, nothing else matters. Blood and chaos, the dark arts unfold, in the realm of role-playing, where legends are told.
Well, here we are again, ladies and gentlemen, on the side question episode of Inside the GM Studio, where me and my hetero life mate Matt answer questions from the internet. I am your host, David.
I am that Matt.
That Matt Hansen. So I'm just going to roll a die. Matt's going to pick a question from the internet, hopefully one that's not defunct or really retarded. But we've been in the zone this year, man. We haven't had a dumb question all year.
So far.
So we'll see. I get a 7.
Okay.
7.
All right. This one comes from Federal_Sun8198 on RS Game Masters with the title. Oh, I got to bring this over so I can read it correctly. There we go. With the title PC Arcs. I'm just about to finish up my first ever campaign, and it's been an absolute blast, but there's been a crap ton of learning along the way. One area that I'm still feeling a little torn on, though, is PC arcs. I'm very much a GM who likes every character to have their moments in the spotlight, whether that's hard-hitting emotional beats or just badass moments in general. However, I would like some advice/feedback for this particular area from more experienced GMs. Excuse me, hold on.
AIDS.
When writing
Please
character
AIDS.
arcs for your players, do you run it by them or not? The majority of my players have really enjoyed not knowing and being surprised by some additional depth being added to their arcs or characters from their backstory making appearances, etc. But there was one particular arc where I'd accidentally made 2 character backstories have a bit of a clash, and it did cause a little bit of tension, mainly between the characters more so than the players. And that's where this question is coming from, really. Right now, I have made a decision to ask each player what their preference would be in a session 0 of my next campaign, but I'd also like to hear your guys' experiences and how you handle this particular area. Okay, I got it.
Okay. This is something that is more of an advanced GM technique. So once a GM gets past the ability to manage a table, to manage the mechanics of the game, and overall have a story that keeps the players engaged, like that's kind of like tier 1, right? Make sure that you know the rules as a referee. You can keep the action moving forward and keep the players invested in the game. Most games probably operate on that level, and it's fine. You can run a perfectly great campaign on just that level. But then kind of a step up from there is kind of some world building stuff. Some things that, like balancing realism versus fantastical elements, how to structure a plot so that it is, moving forward. Then beyond that, you probably have like the next tier up, which is probably where he is, and I would posit there's probably even one more tier above that, but we won't get there. The tier that he's in is where he's starting to consider the interplay of the first 2 tiers. So in that second tier, you have the technique that he alluded to, which is, share the spotlight. You want the players to all kind of have a moment to shine at certain intervals. And at that level, you're probably making sure that moment to shine has something to do with their backstory, which is also in kind of tier 2, pulling at players' backstories. but probably also has something to do with their class, their race, their role in the party. Make sure that rogues have an opportunity to sneak, fighters have an opportunity to break, wizards have an opportunity to cast utility spells, and so on and so forth. But he's getting to the next layer of that, which is like, how do I create a cohesive arc for the character?
Right.
Sharing the spotlight is not enough to really ensure a cohesive arc. It's satisfying, but if it's not taking the entire context into play. He's trying to apply basically what you do with the basic narrative of the plot, which is again a kind of a tier two thing. How do I create a plot arc? But for individual characters. And the sophistication with that comes into play when you realize that you want your character arcs to track along the overarching story plot, right? So that the characters' plot arcs individually come to a resolution roughly around the same time the main thrust of the campaign does. This is no easy feat to do. But since he's already familiar with sharing the spotlight, what he needs to do is begin to bake in the in storytelling they call it the escalation ladder. So every time you give a player an opportunity to share the spotlight, do so with some sort of purpose as to what that does to raise the stakes of the drama. And if it doesn't raise the stakes of the drama, figure out a way to make it do that, because it's just like it sounds. You're climbing a ladder, right? And as you get higher and higher, the anxiety of like, whoa, this is getting more intense and more serious ought to rise. So every moment that you give the player the spotlight should be a rung on that ladder and should be meaningful. And that could be because you've hinged it on some of their stuff in their backstory. It could be because of some of the things that the player personally wants. It could be some of the things that you have an idea might tie to the main plot, or some surprises that you have. As for the second part of his question, we can get into that, but I wanted to let Matt be able to jump in here on the first part.
Yeah, so with the first part here, when he was talking about do you run it by your players, me personally, no, because I am more of a fan of kind of organically creating the arc as we go along.
Mhm.
I don't really even do a lot of questionnaires beforehand. Like Dave kind of changed my opinion on them. I was never a big guy on just like a bunch of questions beforehand. I did it for like character connections sometimes, but
Mhm.
ever since Dave has started doing this, we fill out these questionnaires before the campaign starts, and I think it's really good. And this would help out with at least the beginning of character arcs, putting together character arcs, I guess. But like in the beginning of campaigns, I would usually ask a question just like, "What is your reason for adventuring? What is your reason for becoming a Shadowrunner? What is your reason for going on a mystery? If I was playing like a Call of Cthulhu game, why the fuck would you even be chasing after something this dangerous?" Uh, Questions like that, and at least that's just something about the character that I know that I can use later on to start a character arc, and then they can change along the way depending on whatever the player decides to do. I don't want to take that away from them when it comes to their own arc. But that might be too soft of me. Maybe I should be a little bit harder and when it comes to actual like character story arcs and making sure that I'm the one that's directing it a little bit more, because that's life.
Yeah, to me that was the kind of the second part of the question, which is so since you already touched on it, I don't think that makes you soft, but here's the thing. I understand the instinct to want to give your player autonomy and to
Yep.
give them control over their destiny within the context of the game. But try thinking about it this way. The player's job is not to be the storyteller. Your job is to be the storyteller as the GM, and you want to deliver on something that the player is satisfied with. And so I'm kind of probably um, splitting the baby there a little bit. I don't share everything with the player. I do fill in some gaps because I like there to be surprises for the player, not just a track for the character that
Yeah.
they know
Yeah.
where it's going. Um, so this is the thing with the questionnaire. I don't ever ask within the questionnaire, what do you see your character arc as, right?
Right.
I get ammunition for trying to think of something that might be an interesting character arc. And this comes up often with characters' flaws, with maybe some of the ways they interact. Like a character arc at the heart of almost every story is starts with what John Truby, again, I've probably referenced The Anatomy of a Story before, but it's a very formative book in understanding not just screenwriting, but storytelling in general. So in Truby's book, characters start with a moral need. And what that means is that they have to have some sort of flaw, ideally a flaw that hurts them and at least one other person. And the likelihood is that they don't really see it. They don't understand why it's a problem. But as the plot escalates, external forces force this on the character. They make them realize why this is a problem. And they force them through some change to complete a character arc where they go from having a moral need to some sort of revelation to putting their new self in action. Or sometimes it just destroys them entirely because they cannot adapt, they cannot change. Think of movies like Taxi Driver or Cool Hand Luke. The narrative of these stories is these characters have a moral need and it is not in them to change it. And so the world destroys them. And that is tragic, but interesting storytelling.
Yeah, it's fucking interesting.
Yeah, it's really good. Sometimes it's better than the more satisfying. So what I would do is if you start with that basic scaffolding, teasing out the character, some just raw data, information. Where did you grow up? What are some things that you did as a child? Why did you adventure? What's your relationship with your parents like? Did you have any hobbies? Did you have any mentors? Did you have any lovers before you started doing all this? Where did you learn your skills? And on and on and on. Then you, as the storyteller, can begin to kind of like craft together something that might look like a character arc for this particular character. Now, you might want to let them know kind of where you envision that is going. Like, I see your character as the tragic anti-hero who needs to come to grips with the fact that he needs others to survive in the world, right? Like this is kind of like a Wolverine type character, right? Like he's a loner and he's very strong and capable, but like he doesn't really ever internalize that like he needs other people, and that because he's just so physically capable and quite literally almost like invulnerable, right? He cannot die. And so it makes him feel like he is an island unto himself. But his psychological demons make life hard for him, and he lives a very lonely life. And so part of his growth is realizing that, he can be part of a family and that and he can contribute. And so, it doesn't ever make him kind of warm and cuddly, but he maintains that edge. But that's why we love him, because he's always 1 foot in and 1 foot out. But that arc is good. So if you said something like that to a character and you go, this is kind of how I see your character arc going, and they say, yeah, that sounds great. Some players might not be in for like a tragic ending to a character. I see your character as the chivalrous knight who strives to learn that the world is more complicated than basic ideas of honor and nobility. And throughout the course of the adventure, because this is kind of a darker adventure, I think your character might meet with a tragic end because he just can't accept that he lives in this ugly world. And that would say something really great about like his moral compass. And your player might be like, no man, that's fucking dark, dude. Like I don't want that to happen, right? And then you go, okay, maybe we can tinker it a little bit. But as for the individual plot beats, there still should be like the climbing up the escalation ladder. There still should be some twists and surprises that cause the player to have to kind of like be thrown for a loop and think on their feet and maybe adjust what it is that they do, or maybe even be a little confused as to where the next rung on that ladder is. That creates tension within the world and the character, and then it'll probably create tension among that character and other characters, and then you have like a whole network of relationships, and it makes it easy to kind of understand where you are on that path. Otherwise, you might just be throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks and see what seems interesting, but then there might be some sort of logical cohesion issues where the character's anxiety is supposed to be rising, and then you give them a moment to like shine, and they shine, and it's like because you weren't clear that tension is ratcheting up, in retrospect, you might realize, well, actually, maybe the psychological burden of this building up would have caused him in that moment to actually not know what to do or to be paralyzed with fear, but we weren't thinking about it because we were just kind of thinking about the overall fun. You need to keep that blueprint within the context of the relationship to the character. Make sure they understand where the arc is going, but keep a few beats, the actual beat by beat sheet, the blueprint, a secret so that they can still be surprised. And it makes it fun for them to navigate their own character arc. So, to what you were saying, Matt, this gives them autonomy to navigate that character arc. Like the way we used to do with master plan, right? Like maybe there's 4 branching paths, but eventually it kind of distills down to
Yeah.
like an overall plot.
Mhm.
I think you can do the same thing with a character arc because it's not really important how the characters get there so much as it makes sense, feels organic, is satisfying to the player, and eventually arrives at the climax that you want it to.
All right, what would you think? So you've now described the GM kind of throwing things towards one of the players, saying, "Hey, I see this might be where you're going towards," which is still, them working together. But what would your thought process or your feelings be if the player came to you and was just like, "This is what I want my arc to be," and then tried to get really descriptive into it?
Yeah, see, but here's the thing is again, let's be clear about what an arc is.
Mm,
An arc is not the character governing the plot, right?
mm,
It's a statement of here's where my character is emotionally and socially and where I want them to arrive. If they craft that and they want to have that arc, then you should take that as fuel for to give them opportunities to demonstrate that arc. But they don't need to know like how they'll get there because they're just stating the intent. Um, I would like my character to go on this journey. In a lot of ways, it might be like if you hired a decorator, right? The
hmm
GM is the decorator, and the player is the person that lives in the house. And they come in and they don't say, "Put a gray couch over here," and put like a mantle with like a ship in a bottle over here. They might just come in and say something like, "I want like kind of a rustic aesthetic, and I want to feel that's homey and kind of more like dark academia kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then the decorator kind of populates the home with the things that have that texture and that feel. I think
Mm,
that relationship is probably more what it should be like if a character comes up with their own character arc. If they start telling you, well, I had this idea that this guy would betray me, and then after that guy betrays me, then this would happen, and like they're fine to put stuff like that in their backstory. That might be the catalyst. This guy betrayed me, and that started my character arc. And it's like, okay, but where does it go from here? Are you seeking
mm,
revenge on that guy? That's a pretty simple character arc to get revenge for the guy that wronged you.
yeah.
But how it gets there, I'm thinking that when we go into the first town, that like some of his minions are there, and I might battle with it. It's like, no, no, now you're stitching together
See,
the
yeah,
plot.
that's what I'm
That's my
talking about.
job. Yeah.
Um, I keep forgetting that we grew up playing a fucking story game, and sometimes there's built-in mechanics in there that work for this really well. As soon as I read a comment like this, um, no Biz like Chloe Biz says the Cosmere RPG has an interesting mechanic I've been porting into other games. At character generation, you define a want and an obstacle. So
Hmm.
our sneaky character has the want to be remembered, but the obstacle is I feel safe. I feel safest disappearing into a crowd. Done properly, this
Mm.
serves an extremely similar function to the needs versus wants concept uh, uh, you said in writing, except that instead of answering the question of what your character really needs in session 0, you play to find out. It's a fantastic adaptation of the literary concept to TTRPGs, but this made me think of Vampire with nature and demeanor.
Yeah.
One is one is what you really are, and the other one is kind of how you show who you are
Yeah.
or what you show as you are. And that could make for a good starting uh starting off point for a character arc. I think hell, because of Thorn's, David's brother Jason played Thorn. I don't know if how long you've listened to us. We've talked about this vampire character before and how long he lasted and how godlike he became. Um, but I think because of the way that he made himself, because Jason was just like, I don't give a fuck. He's a big badass that just intimidates motherfuckers by sneezing wrong. Uh, and his nature was, what was he? He was a Bravo. He was either Bravo Bravo or what was it?
No, he w- this is why it was like on brand because his demeanor was Bravo, which is somebody that bullies his way through life.
Yeah,
But his nature was Survivor, which
that's
means
right.
he'll do anything to like, maintain his immortality. And
That's what
so
it
it was
was.
like
And
each
those two
story it got
together,
more appropriate.
yeah. But that, like, that right there said enough that you could come up with a character arc that just worked perfectly. Chef's kiss.
Because interesting characters have contradictions to them. Um, and the tension between nature and demeanor or want versus need is just those desire versus obstacle is better.
Hmm.
Because to me wants and needs are pretty much the same thing. So especially when you're talking about psychologically. So it's interesting, like the one presented, I want to be remembered, but then the obstacle is that directly the opposite of that,
Yeah.
right? It's like
Yep.
I don't want to people to pay attention to me, which is how you get people to be remembered.
Hmm.
And so the tension between those two concepts, any sort of um contradiction gives a character depth, right? Think of any villain in a movie that's like some cartel kingpin. He's a cutthroat, nasty, ruthless son of a bitch. But then you see him with his kids and he's a doting father and he's thoughtful. And it's like, and you're like, oh, that's interesting, right? He's kind of like a Tony Soprano type.
Yeah.
And like, and that tension is what gives that character depth. And at any time you can try to think of two things that might be at odds or might have myriad uh, myriad circumstances where there's an interplay between the two of them, then you have the DNA for something that creates tension. And as long as the external events that happen, which again that's on the GM, the external events that happen, as long as they prompt the tension between those two to like escalate the stakes, then you have the scaffolding for a great character arc, and it almost writes itself once you do that ground level work of drafting up a blueprint. This is the goal of the character survey, which is just to have a blueprint for how your character thinks psychologically, or how your character thinks and behaves psychologically, perhaps without an awareness. Things that characters aren't aware of are typically more interesting than the things that they are aware of,
Mm.
right? Their competence in their particular field is something that they're aware of, but their psychological need, their moral need is probably going to come from something that they don't know about themselves. And that makes for some interesting psychological drama. Done too much, it can turn into a soap opera. So it should run kind of in the background of the overall plot. But if you just think of the overall plot, the overall NPCs, what their motives are, then you can think of touch points for each of your characters to connect their arcs to the main plot. And if you're doing your job of escalating the main plot among a kind of rising action, falling action, then and you're creating key touch points. I don't know why I'm illustrating with my finger like it's a graph or something. Key touch points along that parabola, then the characters' arcs will just kind of naturally fall and rise in a way that feels organic, provided you're not shoehorning conflict or really kitschy things into the plot. But um, and some games do that, and it works out okay. It just depends on how much gravity, or I guess uh, the end of a character arc, just like the end of a plot arc, depends on how much catharsis you want there to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more catharsis you want, the more seriously you need to treat these character arcs and the plot arc. But if you're not really concerned with large levels of catharsis, it just kind of ends like a Fast and the Furious movie or a Michael Bay movie where everybody just dusts themselves off and they're more or less the same as they were in the beginning and on to the next adventure. I mean,
Now
that
I
can
could
work.
use a drink.
Yeah, right. That's fun, but it really isn't what you would call a character arc. It's just kind
Mm.
of uh, like forward momentum, uh, action for the sake of action, which some genres are more primed to that. D&D is probably somewhere in the middle, not as serious as something like VTM, but not as
Mm.
zany as something like that game that you were playing, the Triangle Academy or whatever it is.
Oh yeah. Ugh. I was looking through the comments here to see if anybody else said anything interesting or brought up anything different, but no, it's mostly all echoing the same thing. Everybody has like not exactly a questionnaire, but like those two questions that were brought up, like the wants and obstacles, or they all have different
Mhm.
names for it. But man, everybody loves to suck the dick of the Cosmere RPG. Maybe I have to go over that. I might have to read that book one more time because wow, these people really just fucking all over it.
Maybe they're just saying that mechanic is useful.
Maybe, yeah,
I felt the same way about the I am not a huge fan of the Mongoose Conan RPG. But I really love the whole idea of an honor score.
hmm
This is almost kind of a baked in character arc that your character is just gaining notoriety, and the most valuable thing he has to him is his honor and his reputation. And it makes everything in the world easier to interact with people. And so, in a world that is super harsh and violent, you quite literally, building this heroic character that's like, can stand in a Nietzschean way on his own 2 feet, but it's made much easier if people like you and they want to help you. So I liked the dichotomy between those, but the rest of the system is laborious and fucking tedious, and that mechanic is just easy. You just roll a
yeah,
percentile, and like if it's below your honor score, then the person has heard of you, and you get static bonus to interacting with them.
yeah.
I thought that was cool. So
Man, Bionic Joey's kind of a dick though. In my experience, they are far more trouble than they are worth. They are a nice idea in theory, but they require constant care and feeding in ways that a more pure sandbox doesn't. The number of times that a player arc led to a genuinely cool moment that we still talk about is dwarfed by a number of times it's caused me to have to spend extra hours prepping, worrying about how we would run a scene if a certain player can't make it this week, or feeling like something I planned to be a cool moment landed flat.
it okay. I'm don't know that I necessarily agree with the delivery there, but I'm kind of with them in spirit. Um,
I
when you
can
have
understand it.
4 or 5 characters and you're trying to ensure that they all have arcs, and the players are more passive in it, they're like, oh, this is my character arc, and like I'll just wait for the plot points that escalate it. And it's like, dude, I'm doing 5 character arcs and a plot and other NPCs.
hmm
Like, I'm sorry, if I push something down to the bottom of the bucket of priorities, it's probably going to be each session whether your character gets some sort of moment that bolsters his character arc, because I'm concerned with the plot, which all the players share.
Yeah. And
Um,
hell, man, sometimes in the plot, NPCs have their own NPC arc. Like fucking if you've done Castle Ravenloft, Esmeralda has her own fucking arc in that book. Well, both her and
yeah,
fucking what's his name?
Rick Rictavio.
Rictavio. Both of them, they
Hmm.
got arcs as NPCs. They got whole arcs in that fucking shit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say that they have arcs, but they have storylines. They do
Right.
things without the players on screen, so to speak.
Well, like
And
things happened in Esmeralda's story depending on where the characters were through the
yeah,
campaign. So
yeah.
that's why I was saying arcs. You know, as soon as I guess her arc is like milestone chapters for the players. Yeah,
Yeah, but I don't know that she reaches any sort of revelation without the player's
mm,
intervention on her own accord. And that's
yeah,
probably what's key, is that and that's fair, because the players should be driving the revelations of the plot largely. Otherwise, it could just be it could be like a Big Trouble Little China situation where it's like Kurt Russell's character. You could pluck Kurt Russell's character out of the entire plot, and the thing goes exactly the same as it
yeah.
does in the movie.
It's the
It's not as
Indiana Jones
entertaining.
curse thing. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's like it would have just happened
yeah.
with
If
the same
Indiana
way
Jones
without him.
wasn't in the movie, it would have ended the same way. The Nazis would
Yeah,
have gotten the arc. They would have opened it. They all would have died.
yeah, yeah. It
Movie
would have.
over.
Well, it would have ended the same, but I posit that Big Trouble would have went exactly the same.
Oh yeah.
Like he doesn't affect anything in the plot throughout the entire plot, let
Mm.
alone like the conclusion. So, but yeah, so you want the players to have that agency, and I don't see a problem with kind of giving players a rough blueprint, or let's just say a roadmap. Here's where your character arc is going, and get them to buy into it, because then that will do some work for you. Because if they buy into what's going to happen, hopefully they'll be more engaged in trying to notice moments where they would kind of chart out their change. And so you don't want to give your players homework, but at the same time, change should feel gradual and organic. And if it doesn't, then it'll just kind of seem oh, like he went from being one way to another way, like he flipped a switch, and that's not how change occurs. So if you get them to buy into it and provide them moments where they can notice opportunities to demonstrate how they're beginning to kind of think differently about stuff, um, that's what you want. But I'm with the commenter. I don't know that I've ever had a huge aha. But because most character arcs are kind of campaign long, or at the very least
Yeah,
several
yeah.
adventures long, and if you don't come to fruition there, then it just can't really happen because
Yeah.
you don't conclude the plot, and concluding a character's arc before the plot is complete is kind of stupid, and so they just flounder around for the remainder of the main plot without anything to do. So
Yeah. All right. I don't think I have anything left on this topic. You got anything to end on there, David?
I do not. I think I said what I had to say.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. Right. Then let's just leave this one with a good night.
And